Hi, this is Sean Sibley from Let's Talk Colorism. We have a new guest here today, Andrew. Today, Andrew and I will be talking about colorism in the gay community. Is there anything you'd like to share, Andrew?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Andrew. I go by just King Andrew on Instagram. I currently have an article on the Medium called "Pornography, Dating Apps, and Its Relation to Dark Skin Queer Femmes and Non-Phallus Users." So if you go on my Instagram, you can check the link on my bio. You can click it and you can read it.
Yep. And we'll also put the link below this video so you guys can check it out, okay?
Mm.
So we're going to get right on into it. So, Andrew, what does the word colorism mean to you?
So colorism to me is basically a system of anti-Blackness wherein which dark-skinned Blackness is seen as the antithesis of humanity. So that means if the closer you are to being a dark-skinned Black person, the closer you are to like animalism, criminality, pathology, and these ideas trickle over into institutions wherein which darker-skinned people are punished harshly, they're more criminalized, they're seen as more animalistic, and this also, of course, translates into the dating arena and everyday life as well. And so I also feel like colorism is, once again, a system of anti-Blackness, and it is global, unfortunately. And non-Black communities of color who participate in colorism and who have a prejudice with the darkest members of their own communities intrinsically have an issue with Black people because Black people are darker relative to them. So yeah, colorism is a global sentiment, as well as the fact that colorism isn't just a byproduct of chattel slavery. We see colorism in West Africa and East Asia, places where there was no chattel slavery, but there was colorism. So colorism is a direct residual from white supremacy and colonization.
Okay. Our next question is, how does colorism manifest in the Black gay community?
So colorism in the gay community looks pretty similar to the heterosexual community or non-queer communities, which darker skinned queer men are only seen as desirable if they are more masculine and also phallus using. If they are not masculine, then they are looked over. If you go on Instagram and you check out the accounts where they feature nothing but Black gay couples, you'll notice that the overwhelming majority of couples are two light-skinned queer men, or if they have a dark-skinned queer man, then he is more masculine and he assumes like more of a masculine role, but that's once in every blue moon.
Right.
And so there's this mission of darker skinned, more feminine, queer Black men on those type of Instagram accounts. And I do feel like with those accounts having tens of thousands of followers, people are internalizing this belief that if you are dark skinned, the only way that you could be desirable is through the ability for you to use your phallus and also find pleasure in that. And this also trickles over into pornography, where in which darker skinned Black men are really used to sort of amplify the BBC myth.
Yeah.
And you don't really find darker skinned Black men in pornography in other types of roles. So even in fantasy, people, the queer community, are internalizing beliefs about darker skinned queer men and that they can only fit within this very gendered box of being hyper masculine.
Right.
So.
Okay, so they're very sexualized in
Mm-hmm.
in dating relationships, and if they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to take on the role of, like you said, using their penis, then they aren't
Right.
appreciated as someone who can be not as masculine in a relationship.
Right.
Okay, all right.
And I also want to add on to the fact that, once again, getting into the idea that there are two light-skinned queer men in relationships and how that is sort of the overwhelming representation, is this idea that if you're light-skinned, you are desirable by default. So
Yes.
if you're lighter skinned, you're allowed to be feminine and you're allowed to be masculine, and people are still going to find you desirable because you have that proximity to whiteness or that proximity to non-Blackness. But if you're dark skinned, you don't have that. You don't have any space to be
Right.
anything other than masculine.
Okay. So I was reading an article by a man named Donovan Thompson on HuffPost, and he stated that he often hears, "I don't normally date dark-skinned men, but you are hot in dating." Is this something that you or any of your peers have heard before? I think it's similar to when dark-skinned women express like they've heard, "You're pretty for a dark-skinned girl," or "I don't usually date dark-skinned girls, and you're my first."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of that. And it's So in my particular experience, I've had people tell me like, you know, I've never dated someone that's dark skinned. I don't even have friends that are dark skinned. Or I'll even there's one situation where I was sitting down and the dude was just like, wow, like you're, and he was black. Everybody that I talk about is going to be black because I don't engage interracially. And the guy was like, oh wow, you're really black as fuck. And I was just like, yeah, like I'm definitely black. And then there's another guy online. He hit me up. He was like, you know, I'm into light skins, but you're gonna have to turn me out. Or they say things like, I'm sexually curious for chocolates. And these men really think that's flattering
Not
because
at
it's this
all.
idea that if you're dark skinned and then like if you're more feminine, that you're supposed to be appreciative of any sort of
Attention.
advance that men get. So they say all types of wild things as if I'm supposed to be flattered that you find me an exception because you don't really like my skin complexion. That's not cute. That's not a good pickup line. It's not given that. And so oftentimes I'll tell them, you know what? I'm no thank you. I don't want to engage with someone that doesn't really see me, but they
Right.
see my complexion and they're obviously they have this discomfort with my complexion and they don't know how to process the fact that they are attracted to me, but they are also colorist.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Question made. Okay. All right. So you talked about this a little bit on like the gay pages. They usually only have like light skinned gay couples, and I've seen people talk about this on Twitter too. Um, so do you find that there is an uplifting of gay lighter skinned black males in the gay community?
Yeah, I do think that in the black community in general, I think if you're light skinned, you're thin, and you're cisgender, you're automatic. People automatically.
Okay, so me and you got disconnected, but we're gonna get right back on into it. We were discussing the uplifting of black lighter skinned males in the gay community.
Mm-hmm. So I was saying, basically in the black community, I think if you're light skinned, you're cisgender, and you're thin, the community automatically likes you. They automatically find you more approachable, safer. They prefer you in activism. They prefer you to be the face of blackness, and ultimately, they prefer you to be a partner of theirs. And I feel like the community, the queer community, is no different. In which oftentimes we see the people who are uplifted or the people who are able to leverage their looks to get a certain amount of following are often light-skinned, thin, cisgender, queer black men. So yeah, I feel like, and also I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about my article, and they also said that they can really think of famous dark-skinned queer men that was also, because we were also talking about pornography, who are in pornography as well, that sort of assume a role that isn't phallic seizing.
Okay. And so give me a second. Okay, I'll come back to it.
Okay.
Okay. So our next question is going to be, so as far as my knowledge of, I feel like you touched on this a little bit, but you can, if you want to add something to it, you can. Okay, so as far as my knowledge of gay relationships, each person usually has a role in the relationship, and that could be like sexually or non-sexually. I do know this is not in every gay male relationship, but I know it's in some. So do you believe that colorism impacts roles in gay relationships? You pretty much touched on this, but if there's anything you want to add, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So like if you're dark skinned, you kind of have to fulfill the more masculine, domineering role. Whereas if you're light skinned, you could basically fulfill any role that you would like, depending on like what relationship like you're looking for. But oftentimes what we see is that especially like the famous queer black couples, oftentimes the darker skinned person is the more masculine person and the lighter skinned person is the more feminine person. And it's almost as if there's just no other space for dark skinned people, dark skinned queer men. And I often try to look for accounts or at least couples that sort of don't have that sort of imagery, but it's actually really hard, especially on the queer accounts, the Instagram accounts. If you try to look for a more feminine dark skinned person next to anybody, that's actually kind of hard to find. It's probably like 1 or 2 out of like 5 accounts that have like hundreds of posts.
Right. Okay. All right, so in an academic article I found that was posted on Frontiers in Psychology, the authors presented the idea that there is a greater level of tolerance towards light-skinned LGBT people, or another way to put it is like reduced homophobia. The study did focus on Jamaica, but I'm interested in hearing your perspective on this as it relates to America. Do you think lighter skinned or mixed race gay men may experience less homophobia than darker skinned Black gay men?
Yeah, I want to start off by saying like a personal story of mine. I remember in middle school, I was one of like three queer people. There was one, he was like a white Latinx. There was another one, he was also queer, but he was light skinned. But I was the recipient of homophobia. Neither were the light skin or the non-Black person. They didn't experience any. Well, I'm not gonna say any, but I noticed that the people that bullied me for being queer were befriending the non-Black queer
Mm,
kids and the light skinned queer kid. But it was when it was me, it was all kinds of faggots and all types of other stuff. So I do feel like if you are, the darker you are, the more likely you'll experience queer phobia. And this also translates into the trans community because in America, the majority of the trans murders are Black women, but of those Black women, they're mostly dark skinned. So it's not a coincidence that people project their hatred onto darker skinned feminine people, especially if their hatred is connected to anti-Blackness, colorism, and queerphobia. And that
yeah,
is why oftentimes we see that dark-skinned trans women are literally getting the brunt of violence from men, not because of they're luring people or anything like that. It's because they're engaging with men who, once again, they find them attractive, but they cannot reconcile with this idea that one, they're engaging with a trans person, and also this idea that dark-skinned feminine people are sexually disposable and that they don't
mhm,
have any value, so they could use them as a fuck. And then when they're done, they can just kill them because who's going to rally behind them? No one's going
right,
to support, no one's going to march, no one's going to protest, and they can just kind of dispose of their bodies like it's meaningless. And we also even see that with dark-skinned cis women, where in which oftentimes they will say things like, you know, or it's this idea that they are just the side hoes and not necessarily
yeah,
someone that is worthy of companionship and love, but more so just used for fucking.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like it all definitely goes into what, like when you said that you were bullied, but the people who were lighter than you were not bullied. It's just all goes back to the idea of dark skin is supposed to be masculine. Dark
Mm-hmm.
skin is masculine, and anything
Mm-hmm.
outside of that is not respected and is not treated well. So I can definitely see, how you would be treated that way
And I
because
also wanted to add that colorism is inherently transphobic too, because it's a societal idea that Blackness is inherently masculine,
yeah,
and that if you have Afrocentric features, if you have kinky hair, if you have a wider nose, that you're supposed to be masculine. So when it comes to dark-skinned cis women, trans women, non-binaries, and people project manliness onto them, what we see Kodak Black often likes to do, or when other celebrities try to equate dark-skinned womanhood to manhood,
yeah,
it's this idea that they're projecting a gender identity onto them that does not belong to them, and that's literally transphobia 101. So we can't even take out transphobia from the conversation of colorism because there's this societal agreement that Blackness and Afrocentrism inherently has to be domineering and masculine.
do you feel that so with trans women, obviously, there may be more of an acceptance towards lighter trans women?
Yes, it's this idea that lighter skinned trans women are easily, like they could pass for
Yeah,
being a woman because once again, we associate lighter skin feature or lighter features, curlier hair, and just Eurocentric features with being more feminine and more dainty and things like that. So they're able to pass as trans women and they're able to seen as real women, whereas dark skinned Black trans women have to work a little bit harder to
right.
pass, even though the idea of passing is transphobic in of itself,
Yeah,
but
I
who are
understand.
able to actually be validated as trans, definitely color comes into play with that.
Okay. All right. So, do you find that in movies that are about gay couples, there is an element of colorism or erasure of darker skinned people, men?
Yeah, we don't really have too much. I could think of Pose. Now, I heard there was some colorism issues on Pose where they had like darker skinned people be more the villain and more like antagonisms. I haven't watched that, so I can't speak too much of that. Moonlight, now that one was more mainstream. A lot of people saw Moonlight. I don't think people necessarily thought there was a colorism issue, but I would argue that even in the movie Moonlight, where the central character Sharon, he was a dark skinned queer man, but he was also represented as hypermasculine, gang affiliated, and his partner, who was of course lighter than he was, would find pleasure in giving Sharon a hand job. So once again, it's reiterating the notion that queer men, dark-skinned queer men's desirability can only be recognized through their ability to use and find pleasure in their penises. So I don't think anybody really caught that, but this conflation with dark-skinned queer men and this hyper-masculinity is just everywhere.
Yeah.
And there was also a show called Noah's Ark, and they had like a range of colors on there of black queer men, but the central couple were two light-skinned black men.
Right.
And then even in a contemporary sense, we have Boomerang, made by Lena Waithe. And in that show, the bisexual dude, he's paired up with another light-skinned person, and the bisexual dude is also light-skinned. So it's kind of like, it's just dark-skinned people, we're just not seen, basically.
Yeah, completely. Okay. All right. So our last question, I feel like you already added to this, but if you want to say anything else about this, you can. So our last question is, what are your personal experiences with colorism in the Black gay community? You have already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot. So it's just from the non-Black people, assuming certain things about your body, projecting ideas of hypermasculinity onto you, from the Black men who they're online and they are actually trying to use color, I guess you can say colorism, to their advantage, because they would like buy into this racist notions about their bodies and about their body parts to try to appeal to non-Black people. And then you also have Black men who would say things like light skin only, or brown only, or brown and light only, or things like black top for red bottom, things like that. And so even like when I'm on dates and things like that, I've had Black men tell me like, oh, like I prefer light skin, or, like I don't really date someone like you. Like this is something that is like continual, or they'll try to make jokes about my complexion. The latest thing that happened to me, I shared my article with someone that I was talking to, and like hours later, I was telling him how I wanted to go outside because I haven't seen the sun in so long, and he was just like, "Well, you kind of should be glad because you kind of need to stay out the sun." Even after I showed him my article and he read it, so it's like you still have
It
to
doesn't
make it
matter.
seem as right, like it's like you already have this idea about my complexion. It's not even presenting my article to you, you still are discomforted by my complexion, and it's really wild. And even being vocal about colorism as a dark-skinned queer man, like it's something that is kind of hard, because it's this idea that anytime you talk about colorism as a dark-skinned person in general, it's this idea that you're angry and that you're
Yep,
bitter, that
jealous.
nobody wants you, you're jealous,
Yep.
what is wrong with you, who hurt you, things like that. It's
Yep.
just so invalidating, and I feel like it reduces the problem to the individual, as if there's it's like an individual problem, instead of looking at society and
Exactly.
examining society for its colorism. So being vocal, I've tried to manage how to amplify my voice and speak on colorism without people projecting anti-Black notions about emotionality, and the fact that we're not entitled to emotionality as Black
Right.
people, as dark-skinned people, because this idea that we don't have ownership to anything.
Yep.
And as dark-skinned people, because there's also this theory that I've looked into by this Black woman called Ideal Black Femme, I believe, on Instagram, and she talks about this notion of dark-skinned slaveability, in which dark-skinned people are seen as slaveable, whereas everybody else kind of isn't. So even getting into this idea that dark skin is slaveable, that we don't have ownership to emotionality, we don't have ownership to our bodies, we don't have ownership to anything really. So talking about colorism is like people want to deprive the emotionality from you and say, why are you so angry? You shouldn't be angry, you're bitter. It's a
Right.
clusterfuck. And so, yeah, being vocal is definitely a challenge in that regard.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a lot of gaslighting.
Right,
Yeah.
a lot of that. And when I share my article with other cis gay men, there's been pushback of, well, you know, that's not my experience. And sometimes they're not even dark skinned who say that, when it's just like, of course, this is not
Of
your
course, it's not
experience.
your experience.
Like, what do you mean? And so it's a lot of gaslighting, particularly from cis Black men. I'm not sure. I mean, I know why, but it's kind of like, that is sort of the hardest demographic to see what colorism is.
Mm-hmm.
And because a lot of them, they could utilize colorism for their benefit. I've seen dark-skinned queer men, the only time they talk about colorism is to get light-skinned gay men to like them, but they don't really talk about colorism for the entirety of dark-skinned people, like dark-skinned fat people, dark-skinned trans people, non-binaries. Right. They only want to talk about colorism as it relates to their desirability.
Dating. Okay.
So I see that.
Well. Okay, so I see what you're saying. So it's like when it comes to them trying to date and them not feeling like they are gaining that attraction, then they'll try to bring up the topic of colorism. But any other time, you know, it's not something they want to talk about and not something they find truth in.
Right, because those same men are not checking for other dark-skinned people. They're checking for the light-skinned people that don't like them because of the fact that they're dark-skinned. And I've even had friends like that, and it's just like, I don't understand how you're not making the connection right here, because it's like you want people to come out of this idea of self-hatred when you're not even there yet. So I don't know how that's gonna happen.
Right. Okay, Drew. Well, I really appreciate your perspective. You gave us everything, and I feel like I know everything about it now. But I'm sure I have more to learn. But I really appreciate you coming and talking with me, and I enjoy having you here today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me once again.
Thank you so much. It was nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too.
Bye.
Bye.